Before we begin today's journey into the high desert of 1888, I want you to sit with a single image. Imagine a woman standing in the middle of a dusty street. Her pockets are heavy with gold coins that feel like lead. These coins weren't a gift. They weren't paid. They were padlocks, a price tag on her tongue. Before we ride into the heart of Bitter Creek, take a moment to hit that like button. It tells the system that these stories of honor and hardship still matter. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and join our community around the campfire. We're building something here, a place for those who appreciate the slow burn of a story told right. Now let's begin. There's a specific kind of sadness that lives in the Old West. It isn't always the sadness of a funeral or a lost gunfight. Sometimes it's the quiet, soul-crushing weight of knowing the good man everyone tips their hat to in the morning is the same monster who leaves you trembling in the dark. It's the sadness of a town that chooses to look at the coat of paint on a house rather than the rot in the foundation. In today's story, we meet a woman who was told her silence was the only thing she had left value. And we meet a man, a rancher named Elias Thorne, who understood that some things cost too much, even if the price is paid in gold. This is what our channel is about. We don't just tell stories of quick draws and outlaws. We tell the stories of the grit beneath the fingernails, the stories of the choices made when the sun goes down, and there's no law for 50 miles but the one you carry in your chest. We tell stories of heart, of silence, and the moment that silence finally breaks. If you believe that the truth is worth more than a comfortable lie, if you find yourself drawn to these tales of the old, hard world where a man's word was his, life and a woman's courage was her only shield, then you are in the right place. And truly, I want to hear from you. Stop what you're doing for a second and head to the comments. What time is it where you are right now? And where in this big world are you listening from? Whether you're in a truck on a long haul, sitting on a porch in the quiet of the evening, or just trying to find a moment of peace. In a loud world, let us know. We read every single one. Now, settle in. Grab your coffee. Let the wind of the plains kick up around you. Because today, the silence is ending. And when it breaks, the whole town is going to tremble. The sun was a white-hot hammer against the anvil of the Arizona dirt. Elias Thorne didn't usually stop for shadows, but the one he saw huddled against the base of the lightning-scarred cottonwood didn't look like a shadow. It looked like a discarded heap of laundry. He pulled the reins on his buckskin, the leather creaking in the absolute silence of the noon heat. He didn't dismount. Out here, you didn't walk into a situation until you'd read the tracks. The woman didn't look up. She was curled into a ball, her dress torn at the shoulder, her hair a matted web of dust and burrs. But it was her hands that Elias noticed first. They were clenched so tight her knuckles looked like polished bone, and she was sitting on a small leather pouch. "Water?" Elias asked. His voice was like two stones rubbing together. She flinched as if he'd fired a shot. Her eyes were wide, glassy with fever. That didn't come from the sun. It came from fear. "I didn't steal it," she whispered. Her voice was thin, a dry reed in the wind. "He gave it to me. He said it was mine if I just stayed gone." Elias swung down from the saddle. He was 60 years old, his back a map of hard winters and his eyes the color of wood smoke. He moved slowly, not because he was tired, but because he knew that sudden movements broke people who were already cracked. He took his canteen, poured a little water onto a clean rag, and set it on a flat rock 5 feet away from her. Then he backed up. "Name's Elias," he said. "I run the Bartee 3 miles north. You're on my land, but the shade is free." She reached for the rag with a trembling hand, dabbing her cracked lips. As she moved, the leather pouch shifted. The heavy, unmistakable clink of gold coins echoed against the silence. It was a sound that didn't belong in the desert. It belonged in a bank vault or a gambler's pocket. "He paid for my silence," she said, and then she began to cry. Not a loud sob, just a silent leaking of tears that left muddy tracks through the dust on her face. Elias leaned against his horse, adjusted his hat, and waited. He was a man who had learned that if you give a person enough silence, they'll eventually fill it with the truth. "Who paid?" he asked, after the sun had moved a fraction of an inch. "Silas Vane," she whispered. Elias felt a cold ripple go down his spine. Silas Vane was the man in the town, called the provider. He owned the mill, the bank, and the biggest ranch for 3 counties. He was the man who paid for the new church bells. "What did he pay for, miss?" "I saw him," she said, her voice gaining a jagged edge. "At the creek. I was picking berries. I saw what he did to the surveyor from the railroad. Silas didn't want the tracks coming through the valley. He wanted the land for himself. He used a shovel. It didn't take long. Then he saw me." She looked at the leather bag as if it were a poisonous snake. "He didn't kill me." He smiled. "He told me I was a good girl and that the surveyor had just moved on. Then he put this gold in my hand. He told me if I ever spoke a word, he'd tell the sheriff I was the one who lured the man there to rob him. He said the town would believe a provider over a girl who works in a laundry." Elias looked at the horizon. He could see the distant smudge of Bitter Creek. "A town built on Silas Vane's credit." "He's right," Elias said. They would believe him, right up until they couldn't anymore. "I can't go back," she said, clutching the bag. "I have to keep moving." "You keep moving. You're just a ghost with a heavy pocket," Elias said. He reached down and picked up the pouch. It was heavy, maybe 50 gold double. "Eagles. This isn't money. It's a chain, and as long as you carry it, he owns your breath." He looked her square in the eyes. "I'm going to town for supplies. You can sit here and wait for the coyotes, or you can climb on the back of that horse, and we can go see if Silas Vane's gold spends as well in the light of day as it does in the dark." Something in her shifted. The fear didn't leave, but it was joined by a spark of anger. It's the most dangerous combination in the West. A person with nothing left to lose and a reason to be mad. Her name was Clara. She rode behind him, her hands light on his coat. They didn't talk. The desert doesn't care about your problems, and Elias wasn't a man for small talk. When they hit the main street of Bitter Creek, the town was busy. Men were unloading grain at Vane's mill. Women were browsing the general store. It looked like a postcard progress. Elias tied the buckskin in front of the Silver Spur Saloon. He didn't hide her. He helped Clara down, her torn dress and dusty face a sharp contrast to the clean-swept boardwalk. "Wait here," Elias said. He walked into the saloon. It was cool inside, smelling of sawdust and stale beer. Silas Vane was at the corner table, surrounded by the mayor and the deputy. Silas looked like a man who had never seen a day of hard labor. His hands were soft, his suit was pressed, and his smile was as wide as a canyon. "Elias," Silas called out, his voice booming with a false heartiness. "Come to talk about that fence line?" Said him a whiskey barkeep. Elias didn't sit. He walked to the center of the room. The room went quiet, not because of the threat, but because Elias Thorne moved with the gravity of storm. Cloud. He reached into his coat and pulled out the leather pouch. He didn't set it down. He tossed it. It landed in the middle of Silas Vane's table with a heavy, metallic thud that cut through the room like a gunshot. The gold coin spilled out, rolling across the dark wood, gleaming under the oil lamps. Silas Vane didn't flinch, but his smile froze. It became a mask. "Found some lost property on my land, Silas," Elias said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. "Seems it belongs to a girl who works at the laundry. She says you gave it to her as a gift for her silence." The deputy stood up, his hand moving toward his belt. "Now, Thorne, watch your tone." "I'm watching my tone just fine," Elias said, his eyes locked on Silas. "I'm just wondering why a provider like Silas would give a year's wages to a girl for saying nothing, unless nothing is a very expensive thing to buy in this town." Silas Vane stood up slowly. He adjusted his cuffs. He looked around the room at the men who owed him money, the men who lived in his houses. The girl is confused, Silas said, his voice smooth as silk. She's been out in the sun. I gave her that money as charity. She told me she wanted to go east to see her mother. I was being a Christian. Is that right? Elias asked. He stepped back and pointed toward the door. Clara stood there. She was shaking, but she was standing. Charity usually comes with a, "Thank you, Silas," Elias said. But Clara here, she says it came with a threat. She says you killed the railroad surveyor at the creek. She says she saw the shovel. The silence in the saloon was so thick you could hear the flies buzzing against the window pane. Silas Vane laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. A surveyor? The man left town. A week ago, everyone saw his horse head toward the pass. Tracks don't lie, Silas. Elias said, horses can be led. Men can be buried. But silence is a hard thing to keep bought. Because eventually, the person you bought realizes that they've sold the only thing that made them human. Elias turned to the room. How many of you have taken a little charity from? Silas? How many of you looked at a fence move an inch or a debt that vanished and decided to keep your mouth shut? How many of you are carrying a pouch of gold in your hearts that's keeping you from being men? A man at the bar, an old rancher named Miller, looked down at his glass. He'd been complaining about Vane's land grabs for years, but his mortgage was held by Vane's bank. Silas Vane's face turned a dark, bruised purple. You're done, Thorne. I'll have you off that land by sunset. Deputy, arrest this woman for theft and Thorne for slander. The deputy took a step forward. Elias didn't draw his gun. He just looked at the deputy. Tom, you've known me 20 years. You know I don't talk for the sake of hearing my own voice. You want to be the man who handcuffs a woman for telling the truth, or do you want to be the man who rides out to the creek with a shovel? The deputy hesitated. He looked at Silas, then at the gold on the table, then at Clara's face. The whole town seemed to tremble at that moment. The power Silas Vane held was a house of cards. It relied on everyone believing that they were the only ones being bought, but looking at the gold on the table, they realized they were all just part of the same ledger. The surveyor's horse, Miller said from the bar, his voice cracking. I saw Silas's foreman leading it toward the pass. I thought it was strange. The surveyor wasn't on it. Shut up, Miller, Silas hissed, but it was too late. One crack in the dam, and the water starts to roar. I saw the shovel in the back of the buckboard. Another man said, he told me he'd fire my brother if I asked about the land deeds. A third voice added. Silas Vane reached for a small derringer in his vest pocket. He was a desperate man, and desperate men are fast but sloppy. Elias Thorne was neither. Before Silas could clear the fabric of his coat, Elias had his coat out. He didn't fire. He just held the barrel inches from Silas's nose. The silence is over, Silas, Elias said. The deputy didn't arrest Clara. He took the derringer from Silas's hand. The walk to the creek took 2 hours. Half the town followed. They found the surveyor where Clara said he'd be. They found the shovel, and they found the surveyor's compass, half crushed in the dirt, when they led Silas Vane away in irons. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked small. He looked like a man who had realized that gold only works when people are afraid to be poor. But out here, being poor is a temporary condition. Being a coward is a permanent one. That evening, Elias Thorne sat on his porch. The sun was dipping low, painting the desert in shades of bruised purple and gold. Clara stood by the rail. She'd washed the dust from her face. She looked like a person again. The pouch of gold sat on the small table between them. What do I do with it? She asked. The town is going to need a schoolhouse, Elias said, his eyes on the horizon. And the surveyor had a family back in St. Louis. I reckon that gold can do more good as a bridge than it ever did as a wall. Clara looked at him. You risked everything. Your ranch. Your life. Why? Elias took a slow sip of his coffee. It was bitter, strong, and honest. "Because I've been quiet before, Clara," he said, "years ago, in a place called Tombstone. I kept my mouth shut when a good man was being ruined because I didn't want the trouble. I spent 10 years trying to sleep through that silence. It's a loud way to live." He looked at her and gave a small, rare nod. "Out here, the wind is always going to howl. The coyotes are always going to scream. But as long as a man or a woman can speak their piece without trembling, then the land still belongs to us, not to the men with the gold." Clara stayed on the ranch for a while. She helped with the books. She helped heal. And eventually, she became the teacher in that new schoolhouse. Bitter Creek changed after that day. It wasn't as rich. The new church bells didn't get bought for another 5 years. But when people walked down the street, they looked each other in the eye. They tipped their hats not out of debt, but out of respect. And every time a stranger rode into town looking to buy a little silence, the folks of Bitter Creek would just point north toward the Barty Ranch. They'd tell the stranger that silence is a very expensive thing to buy in this valley, because Elias Thorne was still there, and he was always listening. It's a hard lesson, isn't it? That the things we think we're being paid to keep secret are actually the things that are keeping us in cages. Silas Vane didn't, just by Clara's silence. He bought her freedom, until a man like Elias Thorne reminded her that the truth doesn't need a heavy pocket. It just needs a steady voice. Before you go, I want you to think about your own Bitter Creek. Is there something you've been quiet about because it was easier? Is there a truth you've been carrying that's starting to feel like a chain? If this story spoke to you, if it reminded you that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to speak in spite of it, hit that like button one more time. It helps us keep these stories alive. And don't forget to subscribe. We have many more trails to ride together, and I wouldn't want you to miss the next one. Until we meet again, remember, gold can buy a lot of things in this world, but it can never buy the peace of a clear conscience. Keep your head up, your heart open, and your word true. We'll see you at the next campfire.